The flight attendant's treatment of the 12-year-old black passenger was so shocking that other travelers started recording. Within hours, the footage would be seen by 50 million people worldwide. But the real shock came when viewers learned that the child being discriminated against was the heir to the airline empire that employed his tormentors. The boy sat quietly in seat 14C, his school uniform pressed and neat, a small backpack containing homework assignments tucked carefully under the seat in front of him. Marcus Williams had flown this route dozens of times before, always accompanied by his father's security detail or trusted family friends. But today was different. Today, he was flying alone for the first time, a milestone his father had agreed to after months of careful consideration and planning. At 12 years old, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone raised in privilege but taught humility. His dark eyes held an intelligence beyond his years, shaped by conversations at dinner tables where business leaders discussed everything from market strategies to social responsibility. He wore a simple navy blazer over a white button-down shirt, no logos, no indicators of wealth except perhaps the quality of the fabric and the precision of the tailoring. The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles was scheduled to take 4 hours. Marcus had brought a book about aviation history, fascinated by the mechanics of flight and the stories of pioneers who had shaped the industry his family now dominated. He had no idea that this particular journey would become a story that would reshape not just his understanding of the world, but the entire corporate culture of the airline he would one day inherit. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh approached his row with the beverage cart, her blonde hair pulled back in the regulation style, her smile practiced and professional. She had been working for Meridian Airlines for 8 years, long enough to develop certain assumptions about passengers, their backgrounds, and their place in the carefully stratified world of commercial aviation. She paused at row 13, serving the elderly white couple with warm smiles and patient attention. The man ordered coffee, black. The woman requested tea with honey. Jennifer took her time, ensuring their preferences were perfectly met, engaging in light conversation about their destination and the weather. Then she moved to row 14. Marcus looked up from his book as the cart approached, ready to politely request an orange juice as he had been taught. But Jennifer's eyes barely registered his presence. She moved past his row without slowing, without making eye contact, without acknowledging the raised hand of a paying passenger. The boy blinked, confused. Perhaps she hadn't seen him. Perhaps the cart was full and she would return. He went back to his book, giving her the benefit of the doubt in the way children often do, assuming the best of adults until proven otherwise. Behind him, in row 15, Sarah Chin noticed the interaction. A marketing executive returning from a conference, she had witnessed enough subtle discrimination in her career to recognize it when she saw it. She watched as Jennifer continued down the aisle, serving every passenger except the one in 14C. 20 minutes passed. Marcus closed his book and looked around the cabin. Other passengers had received their beverages, some even second rounds. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, but none approached his row. His throat felt dry, and he raised his hand tentatively when he saw Jennifer returning with bottled water for a passenger 3 rows ahead. Again, she looked right through him. This time, Sarah Chin pulled out her phone. She wasn't planning to film anything dramatic. She simply wanted to document what appeared to be a pattern of behavior that no child should have to experience. She positioned her device carefully, ensuring the camera captured both Marcus and the flight attendant's interactions with surrounding passengers. Marcus tried again when a male flight attendant named David Rodriguez passed by. The boy stood slightly in his seat, polite and patient. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said softly. "Could I please have some orange juice when you have a moment?" David glanced at him, then looked away quickly. He muttered something about checking with the lead attendant and continued walking. He never returned. By now, other passengers had begun to notice. A businessman in row 12 frowned as he watched the pattern. A mother traveling with her own children in row 16 felt her stomach tighten with recognition and anger. An elderly man across the aisle shook his head in disgust. But no one spoke up. Not yet. Marcus sat back down, his face carefully neutral. At 12, he had already learned to read social situations with the precision of someone who would one day need to navigate boardrooms and hostile negotiations. He understood what was happening, even if he couldn't quite believe it. The realization settled over him slowly, like a heavy blanket. He was being ignored not because he was rude or demanding. He was being ignored because of his skin color. Because a group of adults had looked at a polite, well-dressed child and decided he didn't deserve basic human courtesy. He thought about his father, who had built an empire from nothing, who employed thousands of people, who had taught Marcus that success came with the responsibility to treat everyone with dignity. He thought about the conversations they'd had about historical injustices and the progress that had been made. He thought about how his father would handle this situation. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook where he kept track of interesting observations and quotes he heard. With careful handwriting, he began documenting the time, the flight number, and the names visible on the crew members' badges, not out of anger or revenge, but because his father had taught him that accountability required accurate records. Sarah Chen continued filming, her heart breaking for the child who sat alone, dignified and quietly taking notes. She captured Jennifer's third pass by his row, this time with snacks. She captured David's deliberate avoidance when Marcus politely tried to flag him down again. She captured the exact moment when Marcus stopped trying and simply sat back, his young face reflecting a kind of resignation that no child should ever have to feel. The footage was steady, clear, and damning. But Sarah had no idea she was recording the heir to the very airline whose employees were treating him like he was invisible. 3 hours into the flight, Marcus hadn't received so much as a cup of water. He had watched dozens of passengers around him be served, reserved, and attended to with professional courtesy. He had observed the subtle but unmistakable pattern of discrimination playing out in real time. When the captain announced their initial descent into Los Angeles, Marcus gathered his things and prepared for landing. He tucked his notebook back into his backpack next to his homework and his aviation book. Tomorrow, he would tell his father about the flight. Not because he wanted anyone to be punished, but because he believed his father should know how his employees treated children who looked like his son. As the plane touched down and passengers began to reaching for their belongings, Sarah Chen stopped recording. She had captured 43 minutes of footage showing systematic discrimination against a child. Her finger hovered over the upload button on her social media app. She had no idea she was about to trigger the biggest corporate crisis in aviation history. The terminal was busy with the usual chaos of arriving passengers. Marcus walked through the jet bridge with his backpack, looking for the family driver who would be waiting for him. Behind him, Sarah Chen was already uploading her video with a simple caption. "This is how flight attendants treated a 12-year-old boy for an entire flight. His only crime was being black. This cannot continue." Within the first hour, the video had been shared 500 times. By the second hour, it had reached 5,000 shares. Major news outlets began picking up the story. Twitter users started identifying the airline and demanding accountability. And in a downtown Los Angeles office building, a phone began ringing that would change everything. Marcus Williams Sr. was in the middle of a board meeting when his personal assistant knocked on the conference room door. As the founder and majority owner of Meridian Airlines, he rarely allowed interruptions during quarterly reviews. But something in her assistant's expression made him excuse himself from the room. "Sir, there's something you need to see immediately. It's about Marcus." His blood ran cold. His son's flight should have landed safely an hour ago. Had there been an accident? An emergency? She handed him her tablet, already cued to the viral video. She said, "He's safe," she said quickly, seeing his panic. "But you need to watch this." For the next 10 minutes, Marcus Williams Sr. watched in growing horror as his own employees systematically discriminated against his son. He watched his 12-year-old boy sit with quiet dignity while being treated as less than human. He watched his face change from confusion to understanding to resignation. And he watched it all happen on an airline that he owned, operated by people he employed in violation of every principle he had tried to instill in his company's culture. By the time the video ended, Marcus Williams Sr. was no longer just a concerned father. He was a man who had just discovered that his life's work was built on a foundation of hypocrisy that his own child had been forced to experience firsthand. The board meeting could wait. The quarterly reports could wait. Everything could wait. Because Marcus Williams Sr. was about to do something that would redefine what accountability looked like in corporate America. The war room was assembled within 2 hours. Not a crisis management team designed to minimize damage and protect profits, but something different. Marcus Williams Sr. sat at the head of a polished conference table surrounded by his legal team, his head of human resources, his chief operating officer, and 3 people who specialized in The morning after the viral video exploded across social media, Marcus Williams Sr. walked through the executive offices of Meridian Airlines with the measured pace of a man who had made a decision that would change everything. Behind him, his assistant carried 3 thick folders containing employment records, complaint histories, and what would soon become the foundation for the most comprehensive corporate reformation in aviation history. At 6:47 a.m., exactly 12 hours after the video had reached 10 million views, Marcus entered Conference Room A, where Jennifer Walsh sat across from 2 representatives from Human Resources. She had been called in for what she believed was a routine discussion about passenger feedback. She had no idea that the 12-year-old boy she had systematically ignored was the son of the man who owned the company that employed her. Jennifer smoothed her uniform skirt and checked her reflection in the polished conference table. At 34, she had built what she considered a successful career with Meridian Airlines. She owned a modest home in suburban Chicago, drove a reliable car, and had enough seniority to bid on the most desirable international routes. In her mind, she was a professional who took pride in her work and maintained high standards for passenger service. She had watched the viral video the night before, shared by a friend on Facebook with an angry caption about entitled passengers and social media outrage culture. Jennifer had shaken her head at the footage, thinking it showed yet another example of someone trying to create drama where none existed. She had even commented on the post, writing, "We don't know the whole story. There were always 2 sides." She had no memory of the flight, no recollection of the quiet boy in seat 14C, no awareness that her routine dismissal of a child had been captured and broadcast to millions. In her 8 years of flying, she had served thousands of passengers, and the faces blended together in a continuous stream of beverage orders, safety demonstrations, and professional smiles. The conference room door opened, and Marcus Williams Sr. entered. She recognized him immediately. Every Meridian employee knew their CEO by sight. She straightened in her chair, wondering why such a high-level executive was present for what she assumed was a minor administrative meeting. "Ms. Walsh," Marcus said, taking a seat directly across from her, "thank you for coming in this morning. I wanted to speak with you personally about Flight 447 from Chicago to Los Angeles yesterday afternoon." Jennifer nodded, still confused about why this particular flight would warrant the CEO's attention. "Of course, sir. Was there an issue with the service?" Marcus placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. The viral video began, showing Jennifer's unmistakable figure pushing the beverage cart past a young black passenger who had clearly been trying to get her attention. Jennifer watched herself look directly at the boy and then look away, continuing to serve every other passenger in the surrounding rows. The color drained from Jennifer's face as the video continued. She watched herself ignore the child's polite attempts to flag down service, saw David Rodriguez walk past the boy after a brief exchange,
witnessed the systematic exclusion of a single passenger over the course of 43 minutes. "Do you remember this passenger, Ms. Walsh?" Marcus asked quietly. Jennifer stared at the screen, her mind racing. She had no specific memory of the boy, which was perhaps the most damning revelation of all. Her discrimination had been so casual, so automatic, that it hadn't even registered as a conscious decision. There must be some mistake," she stammered. "I would never intentionally ignore a passenger. Perhaps I didn't see him, or maybe I was planning to return when the cart was less full." Marcus paused the video on a frame that showed Jennifer looking directly at the boy before deliberately turning away. "Ms. Walsh, I want you to look at this child very carefully. I want you to tell me what you see." Jennifer studied the image on the screen. She saw a well-dressed boy in a school uniform sitting politely with his hands folded, making eye contact and raising his hand in the universal gesture for requesting service. There was nothing aggressive in his posture, nothing demanding in his expression. He looked like any other young passenger. "He seems normal, polite," she said slowly. "His name is Marcus Williams, Jr. He's 12 years old. He's flying alone for the first time, traveling from Chicago, where he attends a private academy, to Los Angeles, where his family lives. His father taught him to be respectful to all service staff, to say please and thank you, to never make demands or cause trouble." Jennifer nodded, still not understanding why this particular passenger was receiving such attention. "Ms. Walsh," Marcus said, his voice growing quieter and more intense, "that child is my son." The room fell completely silent. Jennifer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The implications crashed over her like a wave. She had discriminated against the CEO's child, ignored the heir to the airline empire, treated the boss's son as if he were invisible. But Marcus wasn't finished. More importantly, he's a 12-year-old boy who spent 4 hours being treated as less than human by adults who were supposed to ensure his safety and comfort. He's a child who learned yesterday that his race could make him invisible to people who smiled at every other passenger around him. Jennifer began to cry, not from remorse, but from the recognition of what this meant for her career, her livelihood, her future. "Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was your son. If I had known—" "Stop," Marcus interrupted sharply. "If you had known he was my son, you would have treated him differently. But you didn't know, so you treated him according to your actual beliefs about children who look like him. That's the problem, Ms. Walsh. That's exactly the problem." He opened one of the folders his assistant had prepared. "This isn't the first complaint filed against you for discriminatory behavior. Over your 8-year career with Meridian Airlines, 12 passengers have filed formal complaints, specifically citing your treatment of Black passengers, Hispanic passengers, religious attire, and passengers you perceived as being from lower socioeconomic backgrounds." Jennifer's tears stopped as shock took over. 12 complaints? That's impossible. I've never been told about any complaints. That's because they were all filed away with minimal intervention. Ms. Rodriguez from Phoenix filed a complaint in 2019 after you told her that her family seemed confused about their seat assignments and suggested they might be more comfortable in the back of the plane. Mr. Johnson from Detroit filed a complaint in 2020 after you questioned the validity of his first-class upgrade 3 times during a single flight. Ms. Patel from San Francisco filed a complaint in 2021 after you told her that the vegetarian meal she had pre-ordered was probably not available without checking with the galley. Each example hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She had vague memories of these interactions, moments she had justified to herself as maintaining order, ensuring passengers were in their proper seats, managing limited resources efficiently. She had never considered that her assumptions about who belonged where might be based on unconscious bias rather than legitimate concerns. The pattern is clear, Ms. Walsh, and it's not just documented in passenger complaints. Your own colleagues have noticed. Flight attendant Maria Santos noted in a crew report that you consistently assigned the most challenging passengers complaints, spills, medical issues to minority passengers. Captain Jennifer Moore documented that you frequently questioned the credentials of black passengers in first class while never asking similar questions of white passengers. Jennifer sat in stunned silence, confronting the reality that her behavior had been so consistently discriminatory that it was visible to everyone except herself. The professional identity she had built, the career she was proud of, the person she believed she to be, all of it was crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. "What happens now?" she whispered. Marcus closed the folder and looked at her directly. "Ms. Walsh, your employment with Meridian Airlines is terminated effective immediately. You will receive your final paycheck and accrued vacation time, but you will not be eligible for rehire." Jennifer had expected this outcome the moment she learned the boy's identity, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a death sentence. At 34, with 8 years of experience in an industry where reputation mattered enormously, starting over would be nearly impossible. But, Marcus continued, termination is not the end of this conversation.
I have watched the viral video that has been shared millions of times over the past 24 hours. I have seen my son sit quietly and politely while being systematically ignored by flight attendants who served every other passenger in his section. I have watched him try multiple times to request basic service before finally giving up and accepting that he was invisible to the adults responsible for his care. He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle over the room. As a father, I am heartbroken that my child had to experience such treatment. As the owner of this airline, I am horrified that my employees were capable of such discrimination. And as a black man in America, I am unfortunately not surprised that this happened. The admission sent a ripple through the assembled reporters. Marcus Williams Sr. was acknowledging not just corporate failure, but systemic societal issues that extended far beyond his company. This morning, I terminated the employment of Flight Attendant Jennifer Walsh and Flight Attendant David Rodriguez. I have suspended Captain Thomas Bradley pending a full investigation of his failure to address discriminatory behavior under his command. These actions are effective immediately and are non-negotiable. He clicked a remote, and a screen behind him displayed employment statistics for Meridian Airlines. However, firing 3 employees does not address the larger problem. Internal investigation has revealed that discriminatory behavior has been documented and ignored at this company for years. Complaints have been filed and dismissed. Patterns have been identified and overlooked. Passengers have been mistreated and their concerns minimized. The statistics showed that over the past 5 years, Meridian Airlines had received 847 formal complaints related to discriminatory treatment of passengers. Of those complaints, only 12 had resulted in disciplinary action for employees, and only 3 had resulted in termination. These numbers represent not just corporate negligence, but human suffering, Marcus continued. Behind every complaint is a passenger who was made to feel unwelcome, unsafe, or unwanted while traveling with my airline. Behind every ignored report is a person whose dignity was violated and whose trust was betrayed. He clicked again, revealing a comprehensive reform plan that had been developed overnight by teams of consultants, legal experts, and civil rights advocates. Effective immediately, Meridian Airlines is implementing the most extensive bias prevention and passenger rights program in aviation history. Every employee, from ground crew to executives, will undergo 40 hours of intensive bias recognition training developed by leading experts in the field. Every passenger interaction will be monitored and evaluated for patterns of differential treatment. Every complaint will be investigated by independent third parties with the authority to recommend disciplinary action up to and including termination. The scope of the reforms was staggering. Real-time monitoring systems would track passenger service patterns across all flights. Anonymous reporting mechanisms would allow passengers to document discrimination without fear of retaliation. Quarterly public reports would detail complaint patterns, resolution rates, and employee training outcomes. Furthermore, Marcus announced, Meridian Airlines is establishing a $50 million fund for bias prevention research and passenger advocacy. This fund will support academic research into discrimination in transportation, provide grants to civil rights organizations working on travel equity, and offer compensation to passengers who have experienced documented discrimination while flying with our airline. The press conference room erupted in questions, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. I know many of you want to ask about legal liability, stock prices, and competitive implications. Those are legitimate business concerns, and they will be addressed in due time. But today I want to focus on the human impact of what happened to my son and countless other passengers. He looked directly into the cameras, speaking to the millions watching the live stream. If you have flown with Meridian Airlines and experienced discriminatory treatment, I want you to know that I believe you. I am sorry it happened, and I am committed to ensuring it never happens again. If you are a parent sending your child on their first solo flight, I want you to know that we will treat them with the respect and care you would expect for your own family. The final moments of the press conference focused not on corporate messaging, but on personal accountability. Marcus Williams Sr. acknowledged that his wealth and position had insulated him from the realities his own son faced, that building a successful business was meaningless if it perpetuated systems of discrimination, and that true change required sustained commitment rather than temporary public relations gestures. As he left the podium, one reporter called out a final question. Mr. Williams, what would you say to people who think this response is excessive for one isolated incident? Marcus paused at the door and turned back to the microphone. This was not one isolated incident. This was one filmed incident. The difference is crucial, and anyone who doesn't understand that difference is part of the problem we're going to solve. Within hours of the press conference, the response was overwhelming. Civil rights organizations praised the comprehensive nature of the reforms while remaining skeptical about implementation. Competitors scrambled to review their own policies and complaint procedures. Investors initially panicked about the $50 million fund, but then rallied as customer satisfaction surveys showed dramatically improved sentiment toward the Meridian brand. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the bias training consultant whose card Marcus had given to Jennifer Walsh, received a phone call that afternoon from Jennifer herself. Dr. Martinez, Jennifer said, her voice shaking, I need help understanding how I became someone who could ignore a child because of the color of his skin. I need to know how to make sure I never hurt anyone like that again. It was a small step, but it represented the kind of individual transformation that would be necessary to support the systemic changes Marcus Williams Sr. had announced. Because corporate policies could mandate behavior, but they couldn't change hearts and minds. That would require the much harder work of individual accountability and personal growth. As the sun set over Los Angeles, Marcus Williams Jr. sat at his desk doing homework, unaware that his 4-hour flight had triggered the most comprehensive civil rights initiative in aviation history. He was focused on a math problem, methodically working through equations with the same quiet persistence he had shown while being ignored by flight attendants. His father knocked on the door and entered with 2 cups of hot chocolate. They sat together in comfortable silence, father and son, processing a day that had changed both of their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. "Dad," Marcus Jr. said, looking up from his homework, "did I do something wrong on the plane yesterday?" Marcus Sr. set down his cup and looked at his son with infinite tenderness. "No, son. You did everything right. You were polite, patient, and dignified in a situation where adults failed to treat you with basic respect. I'm proud of how you handled yourself." The boy nodded, then asked the question that had been weighing on his mind all day. "Will this make it better for other kids who look like me?" Marcus Sr. smiled, recognizing in his son the same sense of justice and community responsibility that had driven his own decision to transform the airline industry rather than simply seek personal revenge. "I don't know yet," he answered honestly, "but we're going to try our very best to make sure it does." Outside their window, planes continued to crisscross the sky, carrying passengers to destinations around the world. And for the first time in aviation history, those planes were flying under new rules designed to ensure that every passenger, regardless of race, age, or appearance, would be treated with the dignity and respect that Marcus Williams Jr. had been denied but would help millions of others receive.
6 months after the viral video that changed everything, Marcus Williams Jr. stood at the entrance of the newly constructed Meridian Airlines Training Center, watching as groups of flight attendants, ground crew members, and supervisors filed through the doors for their mandatory bias prevention certification. The building itself had been designed as a symbol of transformation, its walls covered with historical photographs documenting the evolution of civil rights in transportation, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the integration of commercial aviation. The boy had grown taller in the months since his discriminatory treatment sparked a corporate revolution, but the quiet dignity that had sustained him through that difficult flight remained unchanged. He wore a simple navy blazer over a white shirt, his school backpack slung over one shoulder, carrying the same aviation history book he had been reading when Jennifer Walsh first ignored his request for service. Today was different, though. Today, Marcus Jr. was not just a passenger, or a victim, or even the son of a powerful CEO. Today, he was a teacher. Dr. Rebecca Martinez emerged from the training center's main conference room, adjusting her presentation materials and checking her watch. Over the past 6 months, she had worked with more than 3,000 Meridian Airlines employees, conducting intensive bias recognition workshops that combined academic research with real-world scenarios. Her program had become the gold standard for anti-discrimination training in the transportation industry, copied by competitors and studied by civil rights organizations worldwide. "Are you ready for this, Marcus?" she asked gently, approaching the 12-year-old with the respect she would show any colleague. "I know it might feel strange to tell your story to people who work for your father's company." Marcus Jr. nodded thoughtfully. Over the months since the incident, he had participated in several training sessions, sharing his experience with groups of employees who were learning to recognize their own unconscious biases. Each time, he had spoken with remarkable composure about what it felt like to be systematically ignored, how it had affected his trust in adults, and what he hoped would change as a result of his experience. "Dr. Martinez, do you think they really understand now? Or are they just being nice because they know who my dad is?" It was a perceptive question that went to the heart of everything the training program was trying to accomplish. How do you measure genuine attitude change versus superficial compliance? How do you know when someone has truly examined their unconscious biases versus simply learning to suppress their discriminatory behaviors in public? "That's something we're still figuring out," Dr. Martinez replied honestly. "But I can tell you that the conversations happening in these training sessions are different from anything I've seen before.
People are asking hard questions about their own assumptions, sharing stories about times they might have treated passengers unfairly, and committing to specific behavior changes. She pulled out a tablet showing training evaluation data from the past 6 months. Employee satisfaction with the bias prevention program is at 94%, which is remarkable for mandatory training. More importantly, passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment have dropped by 78% across all Meridian flights. Marcus Jr. studied the numbers with the analytical mindset he had inherited from his father. But what about the complaints that don't get filed? What about passengers who experience discrimination but don't speak up? Dr. Martinez smiled at the sophistication of his thinking. That's exactly why we implemented the anonymous feedback system. Passengers can now report discriminatory treatment through the airline's app, through text message, or through a dedicated website. We're getting about 200 reports per week, which is actually much higher than the old formal complaint process. Is that good or bad? Marcus asked. It's honest, she replied. We're finally getting a realistic picture of how passengers actually experience service on Meridian flights. Some of the reports document serious discrimination that needs immediate intervention. Others describe subtle microaggressions that probably wouldn't have been reported under the old system. But all of them help us understand where additional training is needed. They walked together toward the conference room where today's training session would take place. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see about 30 employees seated in small groups, engaged in animated discussions about passenger service. Unlike the typical corporate training environment, where participants looked bored or checked their phones, these conversations appeared genuinely engaged and emotionally invested. Today's group is interesting, Dr. Martinez explained. It includes flight attendants from the Chicago-Los Angeles route, the same route you flew 6 months ago. Some of them knew Jennifer Walsh personally. Others worked with David Rodriguez. They're all processing not just abstract concepts about bias, but the reality that their colleagues were capable of discriminating against a child. Marcus Jr. paused at the conference room door, taking a deep breath. Speaking to groups of strangers about his experience had become easier over time, but addressing people who knew his discriminators personally felt different. These weren't abstract learners exploring hypothetical scenarios. These were people confronting the possibility that they themselves might be capable of similar behavior. Inside the conference room, the conversation quieted as Marcus and Martinez entered. The employees, 22 flight attendants, 6 gate agents, and 2 supervisors, turned their attention to the front of the room where a simple chair had been placed next to the projection screen. There were no podiums, no formal staging, just a setup that encouraged conversation rather than lecture. Good afternoon, everyone, Martinez began. As you know, today's session includes a presentation from someone who experienced discriminatory treatment while flying with Meridian Airlines. I want to remind you that this is not about blame or punishment. This is about learning, understanding, and committing to change. She gestured toward Marcus Jr., who walked calmly to the chair and sat down with the same composed dignity he had shown during his original flight. This is Marcus Jr. 6 months ago, when he was 11 years old, he was systematically ignored by Meridian Airlines crew members during Flight 447 from Chicago to Los Angeles. Today, he's going to share that experience with you. Marcus looked around the room, making eye contact with individual employees rather than addressing the group as an anonymous mass. He recognized some faces from company events he had attended with his father, but most were strangers who worked behind the scenes to keep the airline functioning. Hi, everyone, he began, his voice clear and steady. I want to start by saying that I don't think Jennifer Walsh or David Rodriguez are evil people. I think they're people who made assumptions about me based on what I looked like, and those assumptions led them to treat me differently than they treated other passengers. The directness of his opening statement surprised several employees who had expected either anger or forgiveness, but not this kind of analytical framework. Marcus Jr. had learned to discuss his experience in terms of systems and behaviors rather than personal attacks, a skill that made his message more powerful rather than less. When I got on the plane that day, I was excited because it was my first time flying alone. My dad had spent weeks talking to me about airport procedures, airplane safety, and how to interact respectfully with crew members. He taught me to say please and thank you, to follow instructions immediately, and to never cause trouble or make demands. He paused, letting that information settle. I did everything he taught me. I sat quietly, I had my boarding pass ready, I kept my belongings organized, and I waited patiently for service. But for 4 hours, I was treated like I didn't exist. A flight attendant in the second row raised her hand tentatively. Marcus, when you realized you were being ignored, what did you think was happening? Did you understand it was because of your race? Marcus Jr. considered the question carefully. At first, I thought maybe they were just busy, or maybe they hadn't seen me, but after watching them serve everyone around me multiple times while continuing to walk past my seat, I started to understand that it was intentional. And yes, I realized it was probably because I'm black. The same flight attendant followed up. How did that make you feel? Confused first, then sad, then angry, but mostly it made me feel invisible, like I wasn't important enough to deserve basic courtesy from adults who were supposed to take care of passengers. Another employee, a gate agent from Chicago, spoke up. Marcus, I knew Jennifer Walsh. She always seemed professional to me. Do you think she realized what she was doing? It was a challenging question that went to the heart of unconscious bias. Marcus Jr. had discussed this issue extensively with Dr. Martinez and his father, developing a nuanced understanding of how discrimination could be both intentional and unconscious simultaneously. I think she realized she was ignoring me, but I don't think she realized why she was ignoring me. I think she looked at me and made assumptions about whether I belonged in that seat, whether I could afford to be there, whether I deserved the same service as other passengers, and those assumptions felt normal to her, so she didn't question them. Dr. Martinez stepped forward to expand on Marcus's insight. This is exactly what we mean by unconscious bias. Jennifer Walsh wasn't consciously thinking, I'm going to discriminate against this black child, but her unconscious beliefs about race, class, and belonging influenced her behavior in ways she didn't recognize. A supervisor from the Los Angeles hub raised his hand. But how do we prevent that from happening? How do we catch ourselves when we're making unconscious assumptions? Marcus Jr. smiled slightly. That's a really good question. Dr. Martinez has taught me that the first step is admitting that everyone has unconscious biases, including me. The second step is paying attention to your first thoughts when you see different types of passengers. And the third step is asking yourself whether you're treating everyone the same way. He stood up and walked closer to the group, speaking more conversationally. Like, when you see a young black passenger, what's your first thought? Do you wonder if they're in the right seat? Do you assume they might cause trouble? Do you think they probably can't afford first-class service? If you noticed thoughts like that, you can catch yourself and choose to treat that passenger exactly the same way you'd treat anyone else. The room was completely engaged now, with employees leaning forward and taking notes. A flight attendant from the back row asked, Marcus, have you flown with Meridian since that day? Has your experience been different? I've flown with the airline about 20 times since then, and yes, the experience has been completely different. Flight attendants make eye contact, they respond to requests quickly, they're friendly and professional, but I also know that some of that might be because crew members recognize me now as the CEO's son. He paused, considering how to articulate a complex point. That's actually part of the problem we're trying to solve. I shouldn't get better service because of who my father is. Every passenger should get the same respectful treatment that I get now. Dr. Martinez used Marcus's comment as a transition to the technical components of the bias prevention program.
She explained how the airline's new monitoring systems tracked service patterns across different passenger demographics, identifying crew members who consistently provided differential treatment based on race, age, appearance, or perceived socioeconomic status. "The data is actually quite revealing," she said, displaying charts on the projection screen. "Before implementing the bias prevention program, we found significant disparities in service quality. Black passengers in first class were 3 times more likely to have their credentials questioned than white passengers. Hispanic passengers were twice as likely to be asked to move seats or change sections. Religious attire were significantly more likely to experience random additional security screening." The statistics created a murmur of uncomfort in the room, but also recognition. Several employees nodded as they connected the data to behaviors they had witnessed or even engaged in themselves. "The good news is," Dr. Martinez continued, "that these disparities have been dramatically reduced since implementing systematic bias training and behavioral monitoring. We're not perfect yet, but we're measuring our progress and holding ourselves accountable for continuous improvement." A veteran flight attendant with 20 years of experience raised her hand. "Dr. Martinez, some employees have complained that the monitoring system makes them feel like they're being spied on or that they can't trust their own judgment anymore. How do you respond to that?" It was a question that had come up frequently during the training process, reflecting genuine anxiety among long-term employees who were being asked to examine and potentially change deeply ingrained behaviors. Marcus Jr. stepped forward to answer. "Can I respond to that?" he asked Dr. Martinez, who nodded encouragingly. "I understand that feeling," he said to the veteran attendant. "It probably doesn't feel good to have your decisions questioned or to worry that you might accidentally do something wrong. But I want you to think about how it feels to be a passenger who's being discriminated against." He spoke directly to her, his tone respectful but firm. "When Jennifer Walsh ignored me, I felt like I had done something wrong, like I wasn't good enough to deserve basic service from adults who were supposed to take care of passengers. Those feelings lasted for months after the flight ended." The room was completely silent as Marcus continued. "So when employees say they don't like being monitored, I understand that, but I think feeling uncomfortable being watched is less painful than feeling invisible because of your race." The veteran attendant nodded slowly, visibly processing the comparison. That's a perspective I hadn't considered. Thank you." Dr. Martinez used the moment to introduce one of the most innovative aspects of the Meridian Bias Prevention Program. These were specially trained individuals who flew as regular passengers on random flights, documenting service patterns and providing real-time feedback about discriminatory treatment. The advocates aren't there to catch employees doing something wrong. They're there to provide objective observations about service quality and to intervene if they witness discriminatory treatment. Think of them as quality assurance specialists who help ensure that all passengers receive excellent service. A gate agent asked, "How do we identify these passenger advocates? Are they undercover?" "You don't identify them, and that's the point. They look like regular passengers because they are regular passengers. They just happen to be trained to recognize and document discriminatory behavior. The goal is for you to provide excellent, unbiased service to everyone, regardless of whether you think someone might be watching." Marcus Jr. added, "My dad says that character is what you do when nobody's watching. But since we know that unconscious bias can influence behavior even when people have good intentions, having observers helps create accountability." The training session continued for another hour, with employees working through specific scenarios and practicing bias interruption techniques. They role-played situations involving passengers who might trigger unconscious assumptions: teenagers wearing hoodies, elderly passengers with thick accents, families with crying babies, individuals with disabilities, people wearing religious attire.
Each scenario required employees to identify their initial assumptions, examine whether those assumptions were based on relevant information or unconscious bias, and practice providing consistent, respectful service regardless of passenger characteristics. As the session concluded, Dr. Martinez distributed evaluation forms and asked participants to commit to specific behavior changes they would implement in their daily work. The commitments were detailed and personal. I will make eye contact with every passenger when providing service. I will check my assumptions when I feel suspicious about a passenger's credentials. I will intervene if I witness a colleague treating a passenger disrespectfully. Marcus Jr. stood at the front of the room as employees filed out, many stopping to thank him for sharing his experience and to ask follow-up questions about his perspective on airline service and discrimination.
They reached the parking garage where Marcus Sr.'s driver was waiting to take his son home. Before getting into the car, Marcus Jr. turned back to Dr. Martinez with one final question. Dr. Martinez, do you think Jennifer Walsh has really changed, or is she just sorry she got caught? Dr. Martinez had been wondering about this herself. Over the past 6 months, she had worked extensively with Jennifer Walsh through individual counseling sessions and group bias prevention workshops. The former flight attendant had demonstrated genuine engagement with the training process, expressing authentic remorse for her treatment of Marcus and other passengers, and committing to personal behavior changes. I think she's genuinely changed, Dr. Martinez replied carefully. But change is a process, not an event. Jennifer has done the hard work of examining her unconscious biases and understanding how they influenced her behavior. She's committed to continuing that work, even though she's no longer employed by the airline. What's she doing now? Marcus asked. She's actually working with me as a training consultant, Dr. Martinez revealed. She speaks to groups of airline employees about her experience, helping them understand how unconscious bias can influence behavior and how to prevent discriminatory treatment of passengers. Her perspective as someone who engaged in discrimination but learned to change has been valuable for other employees who are struggling with similar issues. Marcus Jr. was surprised by this information. He hadn't known that Jennifer Walsh was now working to prevent the kind of discrimination she had once perpetrated. The complexity of the situation, his former discriminator now working to protect other passengers from similar treatment, challenged his understanding of justice and redemption. "Do you think I should meet with her?" he asked impulsively. Dr. Martinez considered the question carefully. "That would be entirely up to you and your parents. It's not necessary for your healing or for her growth. But if you're genuinely curious about her perspective and her journey, it could be a meaningful conversation." As Marcus Jr. got into the car, he was already thinking about whether such a meeting would be helpful or harmful, whether forgiveness required direct interaction or could exist independently, and whether understanding his discriminator's transformation would provide closure or simply complicate his feelings about the experience. The drive home took 45 minutes, giving Marcus time to process the day's training session and his conversation with Dr. Martinez. Through the car window, he watched planes taking off and landing at Los Angeles International Airport, carrying passengers who were now benefiting from policies and procedures that existed because of his experience. When he arrived home, Marcus Sr. found his father in the study reviewing quarterly reports that showed continued improvement in passenger satisfaction and employee engagement metrics. The financial cost of implementing comprehensive bias prevention measures had been substantial, nearly $200 million in training, monitoring systems, and program development. But the investment was paying dividends in customer loyalty and brand reputation. "How was the training session today?" Marcus Sr. asked, looking up from his reports. "It was good," his son replied, settling into a chair across from his father's desk. "The employees seemed really engaged with the material. They asked thoughtful questions and made specific commitments to change their behavior." "Did you feel comfortable sharing your experience with them?" Marcus Jr. nodded. It's getting easier each time, and I think it helps them understand that discrimination isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about how it feels to be treated differently because of your race. Father and son sat quietly for a moment, both reflecting on how much their lives had changed since that flight 6 months earlier. The viral video of Marcus Jr.'s discrimination had been viewed by more than 50 million people worldwide, triggering policy changes at dozens of companies and inspiring civil rights legislation in 3 states. But in their kitchen, preparing a simple meal and talking about everyday concerns, they were simply a father and son who had faced a challenge together and emerged stronger. Outside their window, planes continued to cross the sky, carrying passengers who were now more likely to receive respectful, unbiased service because a 12-year-old boy had been brave enough to document his experience and a father had been powerful enough to demand accountability. Change was possible. Justice was achievable. And sometimes it started with one person refusing to accept that discrimination was inevitable or normal. The transformation continued, one flight at a time, one passenger interaction at a time, one person at a time. And Marcus Williams, Jr., at 12 years old, had played a crucial role in making it happen.